Well, the next session that we have is the Scottish Mesh Survivors Group. And unfortunately, because of the distances and the difficulty in getting here, they're unable to come today. But they have left a testimony that we're going to ask Valerie Bruss, who is our secretary, to read that.
Dear Baroness Cumberledge and the review team, thank you for inviting us to provide a written statement on behalf of Scottish Mesh survivors. Scottish Mesh survivors represents the thousands of women in Scotland who've been implanted with mesh, the hundreds who've already suffered life-changing injuries, and the others who've not yet realised polypropylene resin are the cause of their health problems. We have been campaigning on this issue for 6 years, lodging a highly successful petition at the Scottish Parliament and securing the first government suspension in the world on mesh implants in June 2014. We have given evidence to not only the Scottish and UK governments, but also Australia and New Zealand, where we supported mesh-injured women there to bring about change. While nothing we can do now can alleviate the life-changing injuries suffered by so many women, we are determined no others will suffer as we all have by ensuring all patients and surgeons in future are made aware that mesh is an avoidable risk. It is a lifetime risk. We are calling on all health providers across the United Kingdom to develop uniformity through care pathways and properly informed consent, to ensure all patients are given the realistic information they need to make the choices that can change their lives, free from the influence of surgeons. The Scottish developed patient information leaflet for synthetic vaginal mesh tape procedures for the surgical treatment of SUI in women is now used across the UK. We believe this will give patients a greater understanding of the non-surgical and surgical options available to them, and this is something which should be made available in GP surgeries as well as all treating hospitals. Many of us were not even offered physiotherapy prior to surgery, despite the fact that it can alleviate symptoms in the majority of cases. Physiotherapy must be the first line of treatment before any surgery is offered. We would also call for the introduction of pelvic floor exercises to be routinely offered to all pregnant women and female high school pupils, and greater importance given to prevention. Our focus is also on ensuring that the thousands of mesh-injured women across the country are given the medical help, treatment and support to allow them to live their lives as best they can after the catastrophic outcomes they have suffered. Unlike other parts of the United Kingdom, surgeons here in Scotland had favoured the transobturator mesh tapes associated with the highest risks of chronic pain and nerve damage. We have seen devastating injuries as a result, with many of our members suffering crippling side effects, with many now in wheelchairs or dependent on walking aids. At the present time, we believe there is no surgeon in Scotland who can fully remove mesh implants, and we face a daily battle trying to get funding for the recognised UK expert mesh removal surgeon and clinic, which is based in London. We believe the UK and Scottish governments must, as a priority, invest in and develop training for specialist mesh removal surgeons, calling on expertise from abroad if necessary. We call for the development of specialist centres offering such service to be accessible to all mesh-injured patients, regardless of where they live. We call on the government to ensure that these surgeons are not those who had any financial links with mesh manufacturers, or those who have flouted mesh suspensions to continue implanting women, as happened in 750 cases here in Scotland. Those surgeons do not have the confidence of patients and should not be offered as our only option, as currently happens. Mesh-injured women should not be subject to the risk of further injury by, in quotes, have-a-go surgeons. We believe the United Kingdom and Scottish governments must, as a priority, invest in and develop training and retraining for gynecologists and neurologists for non-mesh surgical treatments, such as colposuspension and autologous facial sling. There is urgent need for the proper provision and use of translabial ultrasound scanners across the United Kingdom, as this is the only method available to clearly identify mesh inside our bodies. It is a minimally invasive procedure and cheaper than an MRI scan. Currently, no surgeon in Scotland is offering this service. It is unacceptable that women here are forced to find funds to attend NHS or private clinics in England or elsewhere for what should be a routine part of monitoring. As so many mesh-injured women go on to suffer autoimmune illnesses such as fibromyalgia, lupus, arthritis, as well as constant infections, we call for an annual health check to be made available to each of us. Research has shown that chronic inflammation can lead to cancer, which is why we believe each of us should be carefully monitored. We call for mandatory reporting of all mesh-related adverse events throughout the United Kingdom for surgeons in line with what has already been agreed in Scotland. We call for a mandatory database independent from industry to be established and used across the United Kingdom as the only effective way of monitoring mesh, and for this to be considered as a pilot for all future medical implant procedures. We are calling for the government to scrap the current medical watchdog, the Medicines Healthcare Regulatory Agency, as, in quotes, not fit for purpose. It has presided over the metal-on-metal hip scandal, the PIP breast implant scandal, the heart valve scandal, the mesh scandal, and many more, with little regard to the effect on the quality of life of injured patients. While such an agency is in any way, in quotes, paid for by industry, we do not believe it can administer an effective watchdog system. We believe the whole current process is fatally flawed and must be discarded. Unless it is, we believe the mesh scandal and others will continue. This excerpt from the MHRA Committee of Safety of Devices, 19th of July 2012, is all the evidence needed to explain why radical change is urgently required. They stated, in quotes, "If a device is causing havoc but functioning normally, it can only be removed from the market if the device itself is not performing properly or is unsafe," close quotes. This shows our current regulator has known of mesh problems for years and chose to do nothing. If they cannot do the job they were given and properly protect patients, who can? Mesh manufacturer Boston Scientific was allowed to investigate itself when it was at the center of allegations that it used, in quotes, counterfeit polypropylene resin from China. The MHRA response caused further concern when they said even if there was counterfeit material, there was no evidence of safety issues. Again, they relied on the manufacturer's own assurances rather than an independent investigation. Despite all the payouts in the United States and the moratorium on mesh across the United Kingdom, the MHRA continues to state that the, in quotes, benefits outweighs the risks, even when non-industry funded, world-accredited research shows the very opposite, in quotes, the risks outweigh the benefits. When up to 1 in 5 can suffer life-changing injuries from a procedure, is that not enough to stop and carry out an independent investigation? If you are the MHRA, sadly it's not. It is criminal that a Dutch television company were able to get quite far along the regulatory licensing route to register the mesh bag usually used to carry oranges as a mesh implant. That is how shockingly lax our current system is. We fully support innovation, but the current system for implants is fatally flawed and puts patients at dreadful risk. In a catastrophic failure of duty, only a tiny fraction of surgeons ever reported adverse incidents to the MHRA. This allowed mesh manufacturers to continue marketing implants, some of which had not even been tested on humans, with impunity and vigor, making billions of pounds as a result. Mesh implants were seen as, in quotes, cheaper, faster fix, which required less experienced surgeons and saved, in quotes, the NHS £200 per procedure, but nobody counted the human cost of that ill-advised £200 saving. In fact, the NHS and ultimately the taxpayers will face the cost of billions of pounds of treatment and lost jobs, as well as the impact on so many families, while manufacturers currently face no sanction in the United Kingdom, despite the devastation they have caused. We call on government to follow in the footsteps of the US State Attorney Generals of Washington, Mississippi, Kentucky, and California, who are taking legal action against manufacturers accused of, in quotes, misrepresenting the serious risks of mesh, close quotes. Other states are awaiting the results, and the first trial begins in April in Washington. With mesh manufacturers in the United States having already paid out over $3 billion to victims, we believe they should be footing the bill for all treatment women here are having to access, as well as compensation for the ruined lives they have left in their wake. We call on the government to take all possible criminal and civil legal action available to pursue mesh manufacturers and to establish a compensation fund to support victims and their families. Too many women have already died or are dying because their symptoms were dismissed or ignored. Went numerous times to her doctor with pain and chronic inflammation type illnesses, but instead of being sent for the scan which might have saved her life, she was sent to a psychiatrist after being told her pain was, in quotes, all in her head. She finally got the scan 3 years too late, to be told she had only had weeks to live as she developed cancer. Her dying wish and legacy is that all mesh-injured women receive the health checks and monitoring she was denied. But her case is not isolated. We believe there have been many deaths linked to mesh, but they have not been highlighted as such, with the exception of Eileen Baxter, 75, from Lowen Head, who became the first in the United Kingdom to have mesh mentioned on her death certificate. Prior to her death in August, she spent years in agony, suffering recurrent infection and pain, only to be dismissed and assured that it wasn't her mesh that was the problem. It is of huge concern to us that despite the evidence of catastrophic injury and deaths, the Scottish Government is still intent on offering mesh, albeit in exceptional circumstances. Why continue to take those risks when there are alternative methods which have none of the devastating side effects of mesh? The mesh suspension you have recommended in the UK must remain for the following reasons. First, the risks from mesh cannot be mitigated. Clinicians and clinical societies have continuously failed to reassure us how they will mitigate the risk. Better training of surgeons doesn't work, as the risk is with the mesh device, regardless of surgical skill. 2. The risks from mesh cannot be predicted. Clinicians are unable to identify which patients are high risk of developing chronic pain and disability, and which are not. It is Russian roulette. 3. The risks from mesh are lifetime. There are reports where after several years of the good outcomes surgeons talk about, women can start developing serious injuries later in life. 4. Not all the risks of mesh are known. There are more reports of autoimmune diseases and cancer, but clinicians continue to deny them. 5. The risks from mesh are irreversible. No woman goes back to her normal, even if the mesh device is completely removed. Clinicians continue to tell us the improvement rate after mesh removal is 50%. This is not good enough. 6. The risks from mesh are entirely avoidable. The present alternative continence procedures, colposuspension and autologous fascial sling, are not associated with the irreversible adverse events of mesh. This makes mesh procedures entirely avoidable. If no mesh is used, a woman cannot develop mesh-related injuries. After 6 years of campaigning for the safety of women in Scotland, the United Kingdom and beyond, we can assure you that no lessons have been learned from the mesh crisis. Therefore, your action to suspend the procedures last July was absolutely essential and must continue until the risks in the above 6 points can be mitigated. Despite campaigns to raise awareness across the United Kingdom, many GPs still remain oblivious to the many side effects of mesh. As they are the front line for women seeking help, we believe there needs to be an urgent and comprehensive training program rolled out to ensure that they recognize the effects on their patients and what is available to treat them. We call on the UK government to continue the UK Mesh Counselling Hotline indefinitely, not just until April when it's due to close. So many mesh-injured women have had to give up jobs. They have lost marriages and homes as a result of being injured. But we still have to fight tooth and nail to claim benefits or even a blue badge to allow us to park with ease. We call on the government to categorise mesh injury as a recognised disability so injured patients can access the services and support they desperately need. Not all disabilities are visible. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has given mesh-injured patients her unreserved apology. We call on the UK Prime Minister to follow suit with a meaningful apology. We agree with and support all MESH injured groups and women across the United Kingdom and beyond, because we all want the same thing: recognition for what has happened to us, the help and treatment we need to get on with our shattered lives, and the changes that will ensure this kind of catastrophe can never happen again. Even our own Scottish safety review on MESH was, in quotes, whitewash, which has since been discredited, in great part due to the number of so-called independent experts who failed to declare their interests. We have been let down by the clinicians who were supposed to look after us as patients, and by the government officials who were supposed to look after us as safety campaigners. Our trust is now in the independence of your review, as you did believe patients. As Scotland's former Health Secretary, Alex Neil, who ensured Scotland became the first in the world to suspend the use of MESH, said, in quotes, "These injured women were all I needed to see to know something was very badly wrong with this procedure," close quote. It is not enough to say sorry, or that lessons will be learned. Those were the same words that were said after thalidomide, or the blood products scandal. The human cost is far too high for this scandal to pass without meaningful challenge. To quote another MESH victim, in quotes, "I feel as though I am an unsuspecting, unwilling participant in a cruel experiment that has gone wrong," close quotes. This is how many of us feel. What has happened to us cannot be allowed to happen ever again. We would like to thank Baroness Cumberledge for taking the steps she has already taken, and applaud her and her team for putting patients at the heart of this long overdue review. We have been heartened by her stance and determination to hear our voice, which has been our campaign slogan from the beginning. Yours sincerely, Elaine Holmes and Olive McIlroy.
Well, can I thank very much Elaine Holmes and Oliver McIlroy, and on behalf of the Scottish MESH survivors. That was very powerful testimony, and we are very, very grateful to have received it and will take note. And can I thank you, Valerie Brass, for reading it so clearly and so well. And it's been a very interesting session. Thank you.
What's this you